Добрый день, уважаемые участники вебинара. Меня зовут Ольга Лукьянова. Я руководитель кураторской службы факультета дизайна и дизайнов интерьера в Высшей школе «Среда обучения». Сегодня мы продолжаем нашу серию лекций «Встречи вне границ». И это будет первая лекция направления дизайна интерьеров. Но помимо этого у нас еще есть встречи и по дизайну, и по психологии. По психологии у нас проходят встречи по вторникам. Среда – это день дизайна интерьеров. Четверг – это день дизайна. Вот, так что все будет очень интересно, очень классно. Ну, собственно, продолжим про дизайн интерьеров. Но сейчас я вижу, что народ еще подключается, поэтому давайте пока проведем небольшую перекличку. Напишите, пожалуйста, в чате, кто из какого города, чтобы мы понимали, что у нас очень много людей из разных городов. Вот. А пока я расскажу про среду обучения. Мы занимаемся дистанционным образованием с 2003 года. Сейчас у нас есть... Так, все отлично. А сейчас у нас есть 6 факультетов, на которых у нас учатся более 1500 студентов, не только из России, но и из зарубежья. 7 дипломированных специалистов, уже применяя свои знания на практике, в работе. И самым важным для нас является то, что мы, когда к нам приходит человек, мы погружаем его в рабочую такую неповторимую атмосферу, где он учатся на реальных проектах у преподавателей-практиков, и они получают не только теорию, но еще и реальные кейсы. Они учатся на реальных инструментах, на реальных рабочих историях. Для тех, кто интересуется направлением дизайна интерьеров и хочет учиться, вы можете оставить заявку на сайте или можете оставить свои контакты, и наша приемная комиссия с вами свяжется. А всю информацию вы можете получить также на нашем сайте. Зайдите «Среда обучения дизайна интерьеров», там все подробно рассказано. У нас есть как программы дополнительного, так и высшего образования. Думаю, каждый найдет что-то для себя. Теперь давайте перейдем к спикеру. У нас сегодня прекрасная Лиза Такер. Она расскажет вам, что такое устойчивый дизайн и про философию тренда. Она доктор философии, является профессором и заведующей кафедрой дизайна интерьеров в Технологическом институте Вирджинии и преподает курсы экологичного дизайна. Она зарегистрированный архитектор и сертифицированный дизайнер интерьеров, имеет степень в области архитектуры и истории архитектуры. Она также, по-моему, она имеет докторскую степень в области архитектурных исследований университета Миссури-Колумбия. Давайте еще поговорим про регламент встречи. Все у нас должно быть регламентировано, чтобы никто не запутался. Всего наша встреча будет проходить 1,5 часа. 1:15 – это будет лекция, мастер-класс от Лизы. И 15 минут мы отведем на формат вопрос-ответ. Вы можете задавать свои вопросы на протяжении всего вебинара, а в конце я зачитаю самые интересные вопросы Лизе, и она на них даст ответ. В принципе, это все. Большое всем спасибо, и я передаю слово Лизе.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'll go ahead and pull up my screen here. Does that look, can everybody see that? Yes. Okay. So first of all, you just got a little introduction to me, and I'll just add a couple of other things that I think you might find useful as context. I am both an architect and an interior designer. And I came to the whole practice of sustainable design through work in historic preservation, which is what I was doing when I was in practice. So I actually had my own design and architecture firm before I went to Virginia Tech, which is in Blacksburg, Virginia, to become a teacher. So I come from a practice background, and I'm really interested in the overlaps between historic preservation and sustainability. So that is a little bit about me. We just heard a little about your school, so I thought I would tell you a little bit about mine. Virginia Tech has about 34,000 students. We have a variety of different colleges within the university. I am actually located in the College of Architecture and Urban Studies, which combines 4 different schools. So we have people from visual arts, artists, painters, sculptors, that kind of thing. We have a School of Building Construction, where they are learning how to manage construction projects. We have a School of Public and International Affairs, which is focused on planning and policy. And then we have the School of Architecture and Design, which is the one that I am in. And we have those 4 programs of architecture, landscape architecture, industrial design, and interior design. And I actually head up the interior design program. So I am the chair of the interior design program there, both undergraduate and graduate students. So to just tell you a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about today is some of the things that we have integrated throughout our curriculum at Virginia Tech for the interior design students. And so this does have a very North American centric flavor to it, because that's, of course, what we're teaching. And so the first thing I'll talk about are some rating systems and how they specifically impact the practice and education for interior designers. Then I want to talk about carbon and the whole idea of carbon neutral and carbon remediation, specifically as it relates to interiors. And then I'll finish up talking a little bit about materials, because although we aren't focused only on materials, that is a huge part of the interior design, as well as the impact on the human beings that use spaces. So when I talk about the rating systems, I'm really going to be talking about 3 different rating systems. And these 3 are not the only 3 that exist, but they are the 3 that are most commonly used in the United States, Canada, and other parts of North America. So the first of these is the LEED Green Building Rating System. And I'll go over some of the things about the LEED rating system and interiors. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Living Building Challenge, and I will finish up the rating systems with the WELL building rating system. So LEED for interior design and construction, that's what this is saying, ID plus C is version. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and there are several different variations of the rating system. It is 100 points for all of them, and the versions that cover interior design, there's one for commercial interiors, there's one for retail, and there's one for hospitality. And the focus of these is really on what should a LEED project, a project that is certified, what should that project accomplish? And so these are kind of the key objectives of a LEED project. So first of all, the focus is on reversing the contribution to climate change. So we know that buildings have a huge impact on climate change. And so LEED is hoping to have buildings that contribute to reversing that. Second is to enhance human health and well-being, knowing that human beings use interior spaces. How can we protect the health and well-being of the people in the buildings we're designing? The next is to protect and restore water resources. Around the world, there is a shortage of potable water that is for drinking for human beings. And the United States typically has not had a huge problem with that, but even we are starting to see water shortages across the western part of the country. So protecting and restoring water resources is a huge part of making sure that a building is contributing to our footprint as opposed to damaging the planet. Protecting biodiversity and ecosystem services, making sure that when we build buildings or renovate buildings, that we are creating environments for other species, both plant and animal, and allowing them to thrive. Promoting sustainable and regenerative resource cycle. This is really looking at the whole life cycle of the materials and systems that we put into buildings and making sure that they actually contribute to this sustainable cycle. Building a greener economy, making sure that people have a living wage, making sure that this is economically a viable thing. And then finally, enhancing community, social equity, environmental justice, and quality of life. And so with these goals in mind, these are called the lead impact categories. The rating system then addresses ways that a project team might accomplish this in the design of the building. So if we look at, I've pulled up the checklist here for commercial interiors specifically, since we're talking about interior design. And I just want to show you what the broad categories are. Essentially, all LEED green building rating systems, whether they are for new construction or in this case, commercial interiors, include all of these same categories. So you begin with the site, what the location is and how it relates to public transportation. How do people get to the site? Are we requiring people to all own a car? Are there bicycle facilities? That sort of thing. So we're really looking at that even the site is sustainable. So ideally, things occur within an existing neighborhood, for instance, where there is already infrastructure, there is already transportation services to that site and so on. The next one relates to water efficiency. And since this is commercial interiors, the focus is on reducing indoor water use within a building. The next is energy and atmosphere. And this is really about making sure that the systems that are used in the building are efficient. Also making sure that where possible, renewable energy sources such as solar, wind tower, and so on are used. And then also optimizing that energy performance in terms of the lighting in a building, as well as the systems that are used. The next category, which is material and resources, is really the biggest one that interior designers can have a huge impact on. And these different indicators under here have to do with selecting materials that are over their entire life cycle going to be sustainable. So there is, you have to reduce the life cycle on the interior materials. You have to provide for recycling and storage and collection of recycling and so on. Indoor environmental quality is talking about the indoor air quality. So making sure you have low emitting materials or materials that don't emit any off-gassing. In addition to things like thermal comfort, acoustic performance, and then also lighting and access to daylight. The next category is innovation. And this is where if a LEED accredited professional is on the project, you get a point here. And also you can get credit for innovations. So things that aren't covered elsewhere in the rating system, you might be able to be innovative with your sustainable approach and then get credit for that. And then the last ones are in addition to the 100 points, and that is making it site specific. So there are different things that you can do to design for your specific site. So whether it is an arid climate, a tropical climate, whatever the climate happens to be. And so all the rating systems are on 100 points, and to become baseline certified, you need 40 points, which is only 40% of this. But you can then go beyond that and become a silver certified building, a gold certified building, or the highest level, a platinum certified building, which is 80 points or more. So that was kind of a quick overview of LEED, but you can see it's very much focused on trying to make the way we do buildings better. Okay. So that's the underlying focus. It is very technologically focused. It has a lot to do with measuring air quality, measuring performance, building system commissioning, and so on. I want to contrast that with the Living Building Challenge. The Living Building Challenge, which is overseen by the International Living Futures Institute, is actually aspirational. So instead of trying to reduce negative impacts of buildings, the focus is on creating and designing buildings and interiors that actually have a positive environmental impact. And so this is a very different way of looking at things. Most of what the Living Building Challenge requires designers to do, they may not even be able to find the materials and ways of doing it right away. But the idea is that the more that we push this aspirational way of doing buildings, the more industry and manufacturing will change to support that. So the Living Building Challenge is focused around 7 petals. And it is really based on this whole metaphor of a flower, so that if a building is like a flower, it's not harming where it's growing. So similar to LEED, there is a focus on place, which is the site. There's a focus on water. There's a focus on energy, and there's a focus on materials. Where the Living Building Challenge goes beyond LEED is with things like health and happiness, like focusing on people and trying to optimize their well-being. Equity, supporting a just and equitable world with company policies and various other ways to not just say that this is being done, but actually in your actions supporting that. And then beauty, you know, the whole reason we're designers is because we want to create a beautiful world for the people living in it. And so there is this whole focus on beauty in the Living Building Challenge as well. The International Living Future Institute, and I've included the website here, in addition to having this rating system, this 7 petals rating system, they allow you to look at getting a whole building, Living Building Challenge certified, or you can do certain petals. So energy being one of those petals you can focus on. But in addition to that rating system, they also have a net zero energy program. They have a net zero water program. They have a whole way of labeling interior and other construction materials called the Declare label. And a company can look at achieving a just label, which talks about company policies and their social equity. So it really is looking more aspirationally. And to show you, this is just I know you probably can't read all this, but just to go over some of the high points of the declare label, it's looking at the whole life cycle of the material that is being reviewed. It is a third-party verification, which means that it is not done by the company itself. It's done by an outside reviewer. It looks at embodied carbon, and I'm going to talk more about that when we get to materials. But it also looks at things like what happens to this product when you're done with it, the end of life options. And then you will see there is something called the red list. These are ingredients or chemicals that we know are carcinogens. They cause harm to human beings. They can cause things like cancer, high blood pressure, asthma, and a variety of other things. And the idea is that in order to meet the declared label, you need to really avoid these. At minimum, disclose them, but ideally avoid them. And so that's what one of the declare labels looks like. The just label, you can see here, it's now in version 2, looks at an organization and what it does, how many employees they have, how many office locations, and then it goes through the social justice indicators. And so it's looking at how diverse and inclusive is the organization. Is there equity amongst the employees? How is the employee health? What are the employees' benefits? What sorts of things does this organization do to take care of the world or the community in which it exists? And then finally, it looks at purchasing and supply chain issues. The types of things, where are you getting your paper for the office, and so on. So a company can go through this process to say that they are in fact focused on social justice and trying to be inclusive and so on. So that's the Living Building Challenge. The last one of these I want to talk about is WELL, or the WELL standard. And WELL is in version 2, and it is focused on human health. So unlike the previous 2, which were focused on buildings primarily, this rating system is focused on human health. So it's really looking at the evidence and designing using evidence so that we're creating healthy interior environments for people. So you can see the principles that this system is founded on are to be equitable, to be global, to be evidence-based, to be technically robust, to focus on the customer, and over time be resilient. So as advances are made, buildings change. The WELL rating system also has a series of categories like the previous 2, but some of these are a little different. So what air, water, light, thermal comfort, sound, materials, those are all going to sound familiar. The ones that are new, nourishment, looking at the food options that are provided in the cafe in the building, for instance, making sure portion sizes are healthy, making sure there are no trans fats in any of the products that are being sold in the vending machines. It's really looking at, supporting human health in all of these ways. So an example, underwater, I'll just use that one. Not only does the water have to meet safety standards for purity, for drinking and that sort of thing, but you also need to locate a water fountain within a close enough distance to all employees. So you may have more water fountains than are required in order to meet this condition of really making it easily accessible to the people in the building. There is also a category for mind. So taking care of the mental health as well as the physical health of building occupants, and community. Is this building located within easy access to other services? So when an employee is on a break, they can go get their hair cut or go to the grocery store and so on. So it really has a holistic approach to human health. And so there are things you can do in a building, for example, to enhance movement. You might make the stairway beautiful and easily accessible as you walk in the front door, and kind of tuck the elevator away so that people's first reaction might be to use the stairs instead of the elevator, and hence you're enhancing the focus on movement. Like LEED, it is a point-based rating system based on 100 points. Like LEED, it has different levels, so silver, gold, and platinum. And basically, the primary difference between LEED and WELL is that LEED is focused on the building, WELL is focused on the people. There's a lot of overlap. They were designed to work together, so there are a lot of things in common between the two of them, but the focus is different. All right, so part 2 of this, I want to talk about carbon neutral buildings, and specifically the Architecture 2030 initiative. Up until very recently, the focus has been entirely on new buildings and the architecture of the building when it is designed and initially constructed. The reason that there has been such a focus on buildings is because construction and materials alone account for about 11% of global carbon dioxide emissions. Then building operations are accounting for another 28%. So this has a huge impact. Now, what they are starting to realize, and you all that are in interior design already know this, the 11% for building materials and construction, if we're only talking about when the building is built, this is leaving out the every 5 to 10 years that an interior in most buildings gets renovated. So we're looking at now what the effect of all of these renovations and the actual work that happens in interior design, what impact that's having on this, because that is not quantified in this kind of pie chart. So the purpose or the goals of the Architecture 2030 initiative were to eliminate the contribution of buildings to carbon dioxide emissions by the year 2030. With recent political events in the United States in particular, the deadline for that has been pushed out because of some things that happened over the last 4 years in this country. But the focus is on designing an energy efficient building, really trying to make sure that not only does the building not use a lot of energy, but that when it does, this energy comes from renewable resources, ideally located on the building site. So you see a little diagram here of some solar panels on the roof, but if not, then they are purchased from off-site renewable energy sources, such as wind, solar, or hydro. So that is kind of the overall goal. They have been working with the International Building Codes group to come up with a zero code, which is a building code that actually will result in this particular type of building. So that's one of the many focuses of the Architecture 2030 initiatives. Now, what we know about interiors in this context, as I mentioned previously, is that they change a lot more frequently than buildings do. And in some sectors, industry sectors such as retail, it can be as frequently as every 2 to 5 years. In other environments, office environments, for instance, it tends to go with leasing agreements. So 5-year agreements, 10-year agreements. So every time you are renegotiating a client to be in a space, it'll get renovated. And so this has a huge impact on this carbon footprint that we're talking about. And the carbon, the embodied carbon of interior materials is something that, at least in the United States, we have not been really teaching students to focus on this. And until all interior designers, anyone specifying interior materials are aware of this, it really is not going to be significantly impacted. So it's very important for anyone who's in school today to understand this whole life cycle of carbon being produced and embodied in the materials that you're putting into an existing building. So how do you find that out? Well, one way is to look at products with a declare label, but there are not a lot of them. Another way to do that is to use their calculation tools. So one of the ones that's been getting a lot of attention recently is EC3. And that tends to be focused on initial construction, but there are interior materials in there, things like gypsum wallboard, for instance, or tile, ceramic tile, and so on. There is also another calculation tool that is called one-click LCA for life cycle assessment. And that is another one that you can use. There are a ton of these, and they're coming out more and more every month. Metropolis Magazine, which is one of the periodicals here that is focused on sustainability, they are really promoting a lot of the new tools that are coming out, and they highlight these in their both their print copy magazine and their online magazine. On their website, they also have a whole section devoted to materials and calculation tools and that kind of thing. So it is possible to find this out in most cases. I'm not going to say all cases, but it takes some additional work above and beyond what we're accustomed to doing, which is maybe looking at the sustainability criteria as self-reported by the manufacturer in most cases. This means you have to go somewhere else. You actually have to go outside of what a manufacturer is saying is sustainable and really do some research on your own to be able to make sure that the product that you're selecting, if you know it's only going to be in there for 5 years, you want to make one decision versus if it is going into the building that's going to be there 100 years, that's a completely different decision. And it's really important to think of ways to reuse what is already there. So this is where I started at the beginning of talking about my background in historic preservation. We have a saying in that community that the most sustainable building is one that already exists. And that is entirely related to this issue of embodied carbon. So the more that you can keep what's already there, the more sustainable your interior project is going to be. Okay, so The last and third section of what I want to talk about is materials. And, you know, on the one hand, as interior designers, we don't want to be known for only selecting finishes. That's not what this is about, because we do, you know, the entire space planning, we do the lighting design, we do three-dimensional spatial design. Like, I think, at least in the United States, people are starting to understand that interior design is a much bigger thing than picking finishes. However, interior designers are the ones who are charged to pick out the finishes. And so as a result, we really are the, you know, the last line of defense in protecting human health by what we're picking, by what we're selecting, by what we're specifying. And just to call a little bit of attention to why this is so important, this is reference to a study that was done in Canada, actually, where they looked at children and they did tests to see what common building products were found and at what rate. So it was done in parts per billion, which is how a lot of this is typically measured. But it was a study of 5,000 children. And what is really critical here is to see the ones that are showing up and at what percentages. So we have had lead paint restrictions in place since the 1970s. And yet 100% of the children in this study had lead in their bloodstream. In addition to that, 100% had PCBs. So why should we be concerned about this? Well, there's a lot of research being done on what a buildup of these types of materials over time will do to a human being. And of particular concern here with children is lead, because it limits brain development, it can impair learning, it can contribute to other problems as that child develops. And so that's what makes this so important, that we're actually paying attention to the materials we're using. So how are 89% of children having mercury in their system? Well, this could be through food, it could be through things like tuna, but it could also be through fluorescent lighting, right? And breaking, like they get broken. We don't intend to break the fluorescent lamps, but that happens. So it's just something to be aware of. This is a trend among adults as well, but this particular study was looking at children. So how can you pick things that you know are going to be better? Well, the first thing is to look and see if there is an environmental product declaration. Manufacturers are pretty much being required to produce these. However, a lot of it is self-reported. Okay, so environmental product declarations are one way to find out what is the mercury content or lead content or, you know, other harmful products that might be in a material. It has less of a focus, though, on human health. So that's why health product declarations are now being developed. Health product declarations look at specific chemicals that we know are carcinogenic or might cause endocrine disruption, disruption to the hormones in the human body, or might bioaccumulate in fat tissue in the human body. So the health product declarations are starting to become more available, and you should definitely see when you're picking a material if it has one of these. They look at all of the ingredients in a material, both natural and chemically produced. and the potential toxins in those materials. So one of the things that you may be thinking to yourself is, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of extra time. And so that's why I've added this fourth thing here. You really want to know your clients and what their project goals are. Some clients, let's say it's a daycare center, will be very concerned with what might be impacting children, right? Because their children are putting everything in their mouths. They're out near the floor or on the floor a lot of the time. So you want to really make sure that you understand the project goals and your client's goals, and then deal with that as your priority. So setting goals for how, so the flooring material may be your primary goal. And then your secondary goal may be the fabric that goes on the furniture in that space, or the tables that you're going to use, or whatever that happens to be. So it's really important to know what your priorities are and what your client's priorities are. So what are some of the generally the things that you should be asking yourself? I would start with asking yourself, what is in the material? At the very most basic place for this is to get what the manufacturer says is in their material. You can get this from their website. You can request their specifications. That will give you a sense of what they are disclosing is in their material. The second thing that I would do then is ask them if they have an environmental product declaration or a health product declaration, or ideally both. Then I would look at things like, has it been reviewed by a third party? So third-party certifications are things like cradle to cradle. Does it have cradle to cradle certification? Has it received a declare product label? Like really looking to see if anybody outside the company has verified the information. So what is in the material? Then looking at the various components. So why am I saying to look at the various components? Well, it is possible if you're designing a huge building where you're going to be buying, let's say, a lot of flooring material, and there is an ingredient in that flooring material that is bad or toxic. You actually have the ability to challenge the manufacturer to say, we want to buy from you, this is what we want to use, but this ingredient, we need you to find a healthier substitute. And that's what's forcing the market, at least in North America, forcing manufacturers to change, is making that request, telling them, or if you aren't going to use their product, tell them why you aren't going to use their product. The more people who tell them that there might be something in their product they're unwilling to use, the more likely they are to fix it. Where does it come from? There was a lot when sustainability was first a big thing in the United States. There was a big focus on bamboo. Bamboo is rapidly renewable. Everybody should have bamboo flooring and bamboo cabinets and bamboo. But if it's shipping all the way from China, then how sustainable is that bamboo, right? So you need to look at where it comes from throughout its whole life cycle, not just that it might be called a sustainable material. Does it degrade over time? Does it break up and get in the air over time? So a perfect example of this, I bought some 3-ring binders that were sustainable. They were eco-friendly 3 3-ring binders. I had them up on top of a cabinet for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And I realized one day that the outside of the 3-ring binder, the little pieces were breaking off and leaving like a dust of white, because the 3-ring binders were actually disintegrating when exposed to sunlight and just environmental temperature changes. So a lot of materials do this. That was a very obvious example, but does it degrade over time? And how are you going to know that? You need to ask the manufacturer, or you need to go see a project that has been in place for a while that used this material. And then finally, what happens at the end of its lifetime? So there are certain industries that are starting to do reclamation programs. So the carpet industry, most carpet manufacturers in North America, if you specify their product, they make an agreement that they will take it back at the end of its lifetime. Okay. Same thing with acoustical ceiling panels. At the end of their lifetime, most ceiling manufacturers like Armstrong will take back their ceiling tiles, they'll break them down, reconstitute them into new ceiling tiles. Now, where this breaks down is that distribution networks to sell product are very well in place. The system to go get the material or have drop-off points when you're done with it is not in place. So the reality is, like the carpet industry, most manufacturers will take back carpet, but the estimate is it's less than 10% of it ever comes back. So although that's an option, what actually ends up happening is the carpet goes to a landfill, to a trash dump, right? So you need to understand what happens to these products at the end of their life, particularly when we're talking about it being 5 to 10 years. So it could still be in really good condition. Somebody could get value from it, even if you don't want it anymore. So that's the other thing that is really important. Okay, so materials. Just to summarize a few things, you need to, what you're ultimately doing here is looking at health versus costs. And the best thing for the humans in a building may not be the least cost-wise. A lot of times companies that will do more testing and reporting, you know, they're getting their products cradle to cradle certified, they may cost more than something that isn't. So you really have to weigh this, what is more important, the material cost or the health costs? And this plays into the next one, which is long-term costs versus short-term costs, right? So the cheapest thing may not last the longest. It may not be the most durable. It may not be the healthiest, but it may cost less. So how are you going to weigh that? The other thing is to understand that chemicals, not all chemicals are like this, but you're really, the ones that you want to be concerned with are the ones that are called PBTs. So that is, they're persistent, they bioaccumulate. In other words, your body can't process them out. They get stored in your fat tissue. They're stored in your body, and they're toxic. And they define toxic as the amount where it starts to harm a human being. So there may be something that you're exposed to that is toxic, but the duration of time isn't long enough that it's really going to be a problem. Or to take asbestos as an example, they found that asbestos is harmful when it breaks up and gets in the air and you breathe it. If you encapsulate it, meaning you cover it up and seal it up, then it's not as big of a problem. So understanding the exposure and how long a person is actually exposed to these toxins is also important. Equity issues. At least in North America, a lot of the manufacturing facilities that are off-gassing carbon dioxide into the air and are creating, environmentally unsafe conditions are also located near low-income housing developments, for example. In addition to that, if you put the cheapest thing in affordable housing to make it affordable, those are also the things most likely to have PBTs, have toxins, have off-gassing, and so on. So there are equity issues associated with this as well. So some tools that you can look at to sort of qualify the material health. Here is another one. It's called Pharos 2. And there are lots of others, but that's one of the more popular ones being used. The International Living Future Institute is a great resource that they oversee the Living Building Challenge, the Declare label, the Just label. They have tons and tons of information available for designers who really want to make this type of building. Cradle to Cradle, there is a book, Cradle to Cradle, Remaking the Way We Make Things. There is also Cradle to Cradle certification of products. The Health Declaration Collaborative, which oversees the health product declarations. LEED and WELL. LEED is through the US Green Building Council. WELL is through the International Well Building Institute. All of these are resources. So there is no shortage of places to look. What there is a shortage of is time, and in some cases, just not knowing that this is something you need to do. So this is what I'm now teaching my students, and I hope it will benefit you, just knowing that you need to ask, and ask for a health product declaration. Ask if they have one. If enough people ask somebody if they have a health product declaration, they will start to think, oh, maybe I need to have a health product declaration. So very important. So what are the obstacles? There really is not enough information out there and readily available. You have to ask for it, and then manufacturing will change. There's some information available. It's spotty. It varies by industry. As I said, the carpet manufacturers have been on top of this. Paint manufacturers have been very good about this, but you have to ask. The successes so far have been in volatile organic compounds. So having low VOC or no VOC paint, totally possible, right? You can also get other materials that are low or no VOCs. So that's really important. There's also been success with recycled content. A lot of companies now report on their percentage of recycled content in their material. But your best action is to ask questions. Like, look, you have to be curious. You have to think, what do I need to know? What's important for this client and for this project? So the last little piece on this is related to chemistry. And I know, at least, I don't know how you all are, but my students hate science and math for the most part. But it's important to understand the chemistry of these materials, because the molecular structure of the materials will indicate or tell you what the impact on human health and the ecosystem is going to be. So just as an example, plastics, they come from fossil fuels, right? a lot of plastics. They're now doing vegetable plastics and some other things, but the majority of plastics are coming from petrochemicals. So this is going to require a lot of processing, a lot of energy, and then ultimately at the end of it, we recycle it in a way that it's downcycled. So, you know, like high level plastics become plastic bottles, then plastic bottles become plastic bags, and then plastic bags get integrated with wood chips and become a form of decking. So it's not being infinitely recycled at the same level because it's not able to be. So it's really important that you understand that part of this as well. Not all recycling is good. It's energy intensive. Downcycling means ultimately it's going to end up in the landfill. So just a plug there for understanding the chemistry process. So here's a summary of the resources: International Living Future Institute for the Living Building Challenge, the Declare label, and the Just label. Architecture 2030, which has a lot of resources on buildings in general, fewer resources on interiors, to be honest. But it is up to, I would say, the interior design community, the interior design profession worldwide to start to push the importance of interiors in this, because really it's the interiors which are creating the most waste. So no, there are some things within all these systems, but there's more that we need to do. WELL, which is the International Well Building Institute, as I mentioned, and then LEED, the United States Green Building Council. There are LEED buildings on every continent and around the world, just like there are Living Building Challenge buildings around the world, but fewer of them. So in terms of what types of projects are you going to find the most of? Probably LEED projects. Then the other two, there are fewer, but they're also harder to meet. So anyway, some resources. There's no shortage of resources, and new ones come out every day. I should add here Metropolis Magazine, because that is really a rich resource that comes out every month. They have a robust website and so on. And that concludes my presentation on what's happening with sustainable interiors and where I think we need to go. So I am now open to any questions that you might have.
Лиза, большое спасибо. Это было очень круто, очень интересно. И на самом деле такой информации у нас не было никогда. Мы услышали такое вообще впервые. Это было очень интересно. Вот. А теперь я буду переходить к вопросам, которые задают наши студенты, наши слушатели, в том числе наши студенты и наши абитуриенты. Начну с вопроса, который задел меня последним. Также еще тут у себя внутри обсуждаем, какие вопросы нас тревожат. А есть ли вообще какие-то идеи по поводу пластика? Нам известно, что его произведено по всему миру огромное количество. Неужели он так и останется мертвым грузом на теле Земли? Неужели с ним ничего так и не сделают?
Well, so plastic is a huge problem. I actually today in my mail, my Virginia Tech sends out an email every day. They are restricting the use of plastics, all plastic on campus. No plastic water bottles, no plastic spoons and forks, no plastic cups, no plastic containers. And it goes into effect July 22nd. So I'm thrilled that we're doing that. And that is a state mandate. I also know that there's a lot of that starting to happen in various places around the world. The other thing that I think is promising is they are doing work on making plastics out of plant-based materials as opposed to fossil fuel-based processes. They don't have the same properties in all cases. So I think the best thing, this is every person makes a difference in this. Committing to just not using plastic anymore. Every person that does that makes a difference. Now, the truth of the matter is we have big mounds of plastic in the oceans. There is lots of plastic in landfills. We aren't going to get rid of what we've already done, but we can stop adding to it. That's a great question.
Спасибо за такой прекрасный ответ, Лиза. Теперь перейдем к следующему вопросу. Уже пойдут сейчас вопросы от наших слушателей. Как будут утилизироваться здания в будущем? Есть ли какие-то уже идеи по тому, как это будет там, через 20, через 30 лет или через 100 лет? Уйдем в фантастику.
Yeah. Well, there are efforts here, at least, and I think in some other countries, of trying, when buildings are demolished, trying to disassemble as opposed to implode. And I think that allows for recycling of things like steel, the structure, steel structure, wood, if that happens to be the structure. Also, to a certain extent, concrete, but that ends up being made into something else. So it is possible if a construction team and a developer and the architect and the designer insist on it, for it to be done that way. Normally, it's not done that way. As long as we keep blowing things up to demolish them, then they're going to end up in the landfill. So it's really, this is another one of those issues of having to proactively specify that in any kind of contract documents, that is how it needs to happen.
Спасибо. Это очень многое объясняет. То есть получается, что, скорее всего, это будет именно ресайклинг, именно повторная переработка. Спасибо. Следующий вопрос. Вы озвучили очень много стандартов, когда примерно будут построены здания, которые будут отвечать абсолютно всем этим стандартам. Есть ли вообще такая возможность?
It is possible. Okay, so for LEED and WELL, it's possible. The Living Building Challenge is more difficult. There are Living Building Challenge certified buildings, but they are harder to do. I would say, at least in North America, there are entire jurisdictions where all new government buildings, for example, have to meet LEED. So it has been adopted in some jurisdictions. The United States Navy, Army, Marines, all their buildings have to meet LEED standards. So it's starting to happen that it's being required in various places. So I'm optimistic, but it will take everybody working towards that.
Мгм. Спасибо. Следующий вопрос. Очень часто при строительстве здания учитывается мнение заказчика, который не является конечным потребителем. А можете ли вы привести примеры из вашего личного опыта, когда проводилось исследование мнения конечных потребителей? Там, если это медицинское учреждение, то докторов, если это школа, то учителей. Вот такое.
Yeah, I think I'll use healthcare. Healthcare is a good example. There is a growing body of research around evidence-based design. So what that research is based on is doctors' perceptions, nurses' perceptions, visitors, patients, like what they need and how they're reacting to environments. And I think that is one of the areas where the interior designer has a big voice at the table. One of the things that I didn't say, for a LEED building, one of the requirements is that the contractor, the engineers, the architect, the interior designer, the landscape architect, everybody is on board from the beginning. So it's a team-based effort to decide what the goals of the project are and what things in that rating system the team is trying to achieve. And the client is an integrated part of that group. So they will direct what their goals are as a corporation or as an individual or a company or a hospital or whatever. And then the other team members all know that from the beginning. Does that make sense?
Да, да. Спасибо. Так, следующий вопрос. Система оценки используется только для новых строящихся зданий или при реставрации, реконструкции тоже? И возможно ли таки заменять материалы на идентичные, экологичные при реставрационных работах для создания здоровой среды?
Yes. Okay, so LEED has an existing building set of standards and new construction. So they have both. WELL has existing buildings and new construction. The living building challenge is it doesn't specify. So it could be either one. So it is one thing for all building types, and the other ones have different guidelines for each building type. Yes, so it is both.
Спасибо. Тогда следующий вопрос. Есть ли какие-то примеры в международной практике о вторичном использовании отделочных материалов, демонтируемых при ремонте? Где вообще такое уже используется?
I know I have seen examples of wood is a big one. You know, reclaimed wood has been a fairly easy one for people to reuse. So taking down a wood barn, for instance, and planing the wood and making it into flooring. So that's a very common kind of example. I'm not familiar off the top of my head of a ceramic tile reuse. What I would, if it were me, what I would do with ceramic tile is, to the degree possible, reuse it, right? There are some materials that the embodied energy of ceramic tile can last a really long time. It's also incredibly energy intensive to produce. So it is an example of a really high embodied carbon material that if you can reuse it in place, that's your best choice. That's not always what people want to do, understood, but there are examples of gypsum wallboard being reused. With gypsum wallboard and carpet, they both end up being broken down and then reused as the same thing. Same thing with acoustical ceiling tiles, again, broken down, reused as the same thing. So it is possible to recycle those within a same loop recycling system. So they're not being downcycled. Ceramic tile is not that way necessarily, depending on the type of tile that it is. But yeah, I've seen brick reuse in interiors. Metals can be recycled and reused, and in some cases taken out and reused. There is a whole area of design called design for disassembly, which is creating a design in such a way that it can be easily disassembled and reused somewhere else. That would be a good thing to look at for this area as well.
Огромное спасибо за такой прекрасный ответ. Перейдем к следующему вопросу. Какой должен быть срок жизни у экологичных материалов? Потому что, как правило, экологичные материалы, они не всегда долговечные, но при этом замена таких материалов может, опять же, привести к огромному выбросу СО2, например. Вот.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that first in a general way. I think the fewer materials or layers of materials or different materials that you can use is the most sustainable approach. Okay, so what I mean by that is having multiple interior wall surfaces that, or multiple flooring changes. That tends to contribute to, first of all, where they join, you get problems, particularly in flooring. Okay, so if you're switching from a wood floor to a carpet floor, the carpet gets frayed at the edge or the wood gets damaged at the edge a lot of times over wear and tear. As far as sustainable materials being less durable, it depends on what it is. I would say that, to go back to the bamboo flooring example, that's a good example of one that punctures very easily. It's not particularly hard. And over time, somebody may want to replace that for that reason. Whereas if they had used sustainably grown and forest certified maple flooring, it might last longer because you can refinish it, right? So a lot of it is about looking at that whole life cycle. It never makes sense to pick something that is only going to last a couple of years and put that in a commercial environment. I mean, that's not sustainable, because if you look at the life cycle, it's doing exactly what you're saying. It's adding to the waste stream. It's creating more carbon issues. I mean, it's just not sustainable. So I wouldn't call that a sustainable product. I think that's part of the important thing to understand here. A manufacturer might say, here's my sustainable flooring, but if it only lasts 2 years, it's not. So you have to look at all that. You got the point. That's the whole point of looking at everything.
Спасибо. А какие материалы, используемые в строительстве, вообще наиболее экологичны и даже полезны для окружающей среды? Потому что мы говорим много о том, что для нас пагубно, а какие хорошие?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, again, generally speaking, I would look for things that don't off gas. So if you're going to use paint, use a low or no volatile organic compound paint. I think things like they are looking at options for concrete that has less, it gives off less heat, and therefore the carbon footprint is less. So because concrete actually is one of the biggest embodied carbon and carbon dioxide contributors of all building materials. So concrete, they're working on that. So I think that there are different manufacturers doing things that are making that a lot more sustainable. I think any kind of sustainably grown and harvested in a managed forest kind of woods are generally pretty, I personally, and this may be my preservation background, but I like to stick to the known materials. So, like, and there are issues with all materials, but I'm going to say, if you try to stick with wood, concrete, brick, stone, basic, and look for your best option. So, specifying a granite countertop that comes from halfway around the world is not a good idea, right? Specifying a granite countertop for somebody who likes to change their kitchen every 5 years, not a good idea. Specifying a granite countertop for yourself because you know that you're going to want that there for the rest of your life, then it might be, and look for something local. So a lot of it is about, who's it for? How long is it going to be there? But really looking at all those factors as a part of this decision. So, like, is there a list of here are the 5 best sustainable materials? The answer is going to be, it depends, right? It depends on the context, the client, your location, what's available. Looking for local kind of vernacular materials, what is known to be used in that location is usually a sustainable option.
Спасибо большое за такой великолепный ответ. Мне кажется, я еще несколько раз скажу такую фразу, потому что вы настолько полно и классно отвечаете, что сразу хочется задать следующий вопрос. Вот у нас в России есть такая ситуация, что экологичные материалы у нас стоят на несколько уровней дороже традиционных материалов. Есть ли такая ситуация в США? И если есть ли тенденция к изменению этой ситуации?
Yes and yes. Originally, everybody thought they were a lot more expensive. Then there was a study conducted by the Rocky Mountain Institute, and they showed that on average, it was about 2% more expensive, which wasn't a huge markup, but it wasn't the sustainable options aren't always the least expensive. In fact, normally they cost more, at least a little more. But one of the things that has now happened is because so many architects and designers are requesting those things, that they are now at the price range is coming down to be equal. So manufacturers are dumping things that they may have produced for a really long time in favor of what's being asked for. So designers and architects and developers and contractors can actually change what is produced by asking for it. And it takes time. It doesn't happen right away, but it can happen.
То есть есть вероятность того, что дороговизна этих материалов обуславливается тем, что архитекторы и дизайнеры еще не совсем привыкли к этим материалам, верно?
Yep. Exactly.
Отлично. Тогда следующий вопрос. А какой сейчас самый популярный материал для строительства в США или Европе? Вот.
For base construction, heavy timber is becoming a huge industry in parts of North America. I would say a lot of it's exactly what you would expect though: steel, concrete, glass. Those are the three big ones. And so what's happening is there's a lot of steel being recycled. So that's become a big part of the recycling industry. Same with the work that I was talking about on concrete. But heavy timber, sustainably harvested and produced heavy timber, that's really being pushed, and it's being integrated into the building codes where it wasn't in there before. So I would say that's probably the up and coming material.
Спасибо. Следующий вопрос, опять, наверное, немножко про сравнение. Вот у нас в России есть, мы очень любим пластиковые окна. У нас поставить пластиковые окна, это значит, что все хорошо. Если у тебя там в холодные морозы будет тепло, потому что они не пропускают ничего. Вот. И у нас их очень много. Есть ли у вас такая же ситуация с такими окнами? И какое вообще будущее может быть у пластиковых окон?
Yes. One of the, I can't predict the future, but I do know that I have a friend who is a chemist, and she dealt in plastics. So she actually went to work for Geldwin Window Company, which is one of the big window companies here, to develop alternative vinyls for the windows. They were doing product testing on plant-based materials, and the big thing that manufacturers are looking for is something that's going to hold up to the same conditions, because it doesn't make any sense to produce something that isn't going to last as long or isn't going to be as effective. I think those are really valid questions. And I would say that windows are one of the areas that there's still a lot being done, a lot of research being done, a lot of testing being done. What they were focused on 10 years ago was making sure there was no air ventilation happening through the windows. And now what they're looking at are the frames. What are the frames made out of to try and mitigate some of the environmental problems. So, a really good point.
Спасибо, Лиза. Это вопрос нашего слушателя. Так, давайте перейдем, наверное, наше время уже заканчивается, поэтому, я думаю, я вам задам последние пару вопросов, именно уже такие более личные для вас. Вот, и первый вопрос. Посоветуйте, пожалуйста, несколько книг интересных по архитектуре, по дизайну интерьеров, которые могут быть полезны нам. На английском языке мы будем их переводить.
Sure. let's see. I'm going to plug my own first because I've written some on this, but there are lots out there. Oh, let's see. Let's see. So there are two. There is also this, and I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but it's a really good one on kind of how siting buildings, and it's sun, light, and wind. Let's see. There's one called Sustainable Interiors. You know what I can do, because I'm having a hard time remembering authors' names and stuff. I can send a list to Elena and then she can share it. Will that work? Okay, good.
Так, спасибо большое, Лиза. Смотрите, и следующий вопрос – это какую литературу по архитектуре, по дизайну интерьеров, в том числе по экологии, можно посоветовать для школьников, именно для того, чтобы прививать вот эту вот любовь не только к красивым зданиям, но и экологичности с детства?
Right. The best one, and this is for young kids, there's a book called The Lorax by Dr. Seuss that is all about like clear cutting all their trees down and how bad it was for them. And that's a really good one for young kids. There's also a book on, it's like a picture book for kids on biomimicry that would be really good. Those are the two that come to mind off the top of my head.
А именно вот если взять именно про архитектуру и про, это вот, я так понимаю, про экологичность, а вот еще и вот именно про то, чтобы было красиво.
Oh, there are, let's see. This is like a toy kind of thing, like the Freuble blocks. This is what Frank Lloyd Wright would play with as a child, apparently, that helped him become a great architect. There are, I'm going to have to look up some of these because I don't know, like I haven't looked into this recently, but I know there are lots of like, how do I build it? You know, those kinds of books that would be really great for kids interested in building or architecture. Yes.
Лиза, спасибо вам большое. Уважаемые слушатели, мы обязательно все книги, которые Лиза нам пришлет, разошлем вместе с записью этой трансляции. Так, Лиза, и последний такой вопрос, он немножечко смешной. У нас есть целый канал, посвященный американским шоу по ремонту и по дизайну. Смотрите ли вы какие-то такие шоу?
I do. There was one through public broadcasting system that was all on renovating the house that it was like down in Florida where Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were next door neighbors, and they edited their whole historic houses. And then there's actually one out of the United Kingdom where they go around and people buy up old manor houses. And I don't remember what the title of that series is, but if you just do a search for restoring castles or restoring manors in the United Kingdom, that one is great. I love that one. So I agree. I love watching those kinds of shows. Yeah.
Спасибо. У нас тоже есть такое, что мы очень любим смотреть, особенно моя мама любит смотреть такие шоу. Вот как не приду к ней домой, она обязательно смотрит что-то такое. Лиза, спасибо вам большое. Я думаю, на этом мы можем заканчивать. Уже 29, 1 минута осталась. Спасибо вам большое за то, что вы уделили нам время и провели такую восхитительную лекцию и ответили настолько полно на наши вопросы.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Спасибо, Лиза. Итак, еще раз большое спасибо всем участникам лекции. Мы будем рады видеть вас на других вебинарах школы среды обучения и встречах вне границ. Вы можете посмотреть все расписания на нашем сайте. Не забудьте зарегистрироваться и добро пожаловать в среду обучения. Увидимся в следующую среду. До свидания.